That's the way I am. When I start doing that, praying in front of people, it's like my mind just locks up and I can't even think of what to say.
So that was like when I was in high school. I used to sing in a band, you know, and everything. I'd get up there, that first song, I couldn't remember nothing.
Yeah.
But after I ever got it out of the way,
Yeah.
You know what I do?
it was all right then.
Yeah.
But
I just take a deep breath and let God do his work. He gonna bring out what's in your heart. He will, Joey. It's good. It's good.
Just ask him to show you what to pray for.
What?
And
Yeah, my kids.
At supper time, they'll start. God is great, and toss it on, and let's.
I got this.
Uncle Tommy, that you take forever.
I'm hungry.
The heart plan before he even comes in there.
You done drive and blown away.
I think that everybody, when they start out, they're have trouble, they're a little bit intimidated or whatever, but nearly everybody starting out has a little trouble praying. But the more you practice, the more you do, the easier it gets, and the more friendly you become with God, and eventually you get real comfortable, and you kind of look forward to praying and praising God for the thing you done, and ask Him to help you do this or that, whatever, and praying for your children, grandchildren. Which, by the way, I've been praying for my grandson. Y'all join me in this if you want to. He's been reading the Bible. I got him a Bible. Cool. He's still in jail. He may get out Monday. I don't know for sure about that, but he's read all the New Testament and through Numbers in the Old Testament, and so I've been praying that the Lord will call him into his service, and so y'all can join me in that prayer, and with the Lord's help, we can call him into some part of the Lord's ministry somewhere. Me personally, is wherever the Lord needs him and wants him, but I've been praying for that, so you guys can join me in that, keeping him in your personal prayers, and just ask the Lord to show him what he wants him to do. And he seems to be enjoying reading the Bible, and he's stayed with it all the way through there since I got it to him, and that's where it all starts. One of the reasons it's kind of like going up talking to a total stranger. You don't know nothing about what's going on, but the more of the scriptures you learn and the more God's ways you learn, the easier it gets. And that's the way all of God's service is. The more you do it, you can't teach, but if you teach, you surprise yourself. You can teach. It's just practice, and it's just trusting the Lord and letting Him use you. And that's what Daniel's done. The Lord called him out special, and he relied on God. He didn't get pre-planned up what he was going to say. He was notified, and in this case, today he's just called in there, and he tells him the interpretation just a short period of time after. So the more comfortable you get, of course, Daniel's a little older, about 30, 35 years older between that first interpretation till now. So you get a lot. Time you grow and mature, you get a lot more comfortable doing all parts of God's work. And last week we looked at chapter 5 in Daniel, and we did the first 5 verses in chapter 5. What was that all about? I did a timeline. What all did we talk about? We talked about some of the pages still out there on the table from last week. One of the questions we answered was, why was God so angry with Judah? Why was He angry with Judah? What did we find out? What did the people of Israel do? The rulers, what did they do?
Something about the gold and silver.
Something about the gold and silver, the vessels.
Oh, yeah. They were taking them from the temple, right?
Yeah, they took them from the temple, and what did they do? What did King Nebuchadnezzar, what did his men do to the temple?
It was his son, wasn't it?
No,
They were drinking out of this stuff, weren't
we look back in there to see what made God so angry with Judah. Nebuchadnezzar was king at the time when God gave Judah over to King Nebuchadnezzar. So the kings of Judah gave Nebuchadnezzar the vessels that were in the Ark of the Covenant. Then what did Nebuchadnezzar and his men do? They burned all of the God's house and everything. They burned everything and destroyed everything. And then there was 4 kings from that first king, from the time there were 4 kings of Judah, and all of them led the nation of Israel into idolatry and everything after following after Nebuchadnezzar. And so they kind of wiped out about 1,500, 2,000 years of tradition and of following God from the time of the going into Egypt all the way up till that time. In that 87-year period of time, they wiped out all that history, and so God was angry with Judah for giving those vessels over to the king, and leading it astray. So he had them captured by King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar then had these visions, and Daniel interpreted his visions because who couldn't?
Wise men.
The wise men and the musicians, magicians, and all of these people couldn't interpret the dreams. So Daniel, God had given this to him as a gift to be able to interpret these dreams. And then at the last verse of chapter 4 and the first verse of chapter 5, Nebuchadnezzar had lived 32 years from that last verse. And then we have a new king, beginning with Belshazzar. And he was having what last week? What did Belshazzar have? What did we finish up with? What kind did he have? Did he just sit down and twiddle his thumbs when he got to be king?
Had a feast.
Had a feast. This was a pretty wild feast. He gave a great feast to thousands of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father, that could be his grandfather or his father. It's not really clear which that is. In the King James it says, Father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem. And the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Now this is Belshazzar using these at this party. So he got a big party. It probably it says 1,000 lords. So how many, they got wives and they got concubines themselves, and they got all these things. So it's a big feast party. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple and out of the house, which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, wives and concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of brass, of iron, and of wood and stone. Now this guy, he's Nebuchadnezzar's son or grandson. Did he learn anything from his father or father or grandfather? Did he listen to him?
Apparently not.
Because Nebuchadnezzar, at the last verse in the previous chapters, he said that God was sovereign over all of the earth and all of mankind, right? Mm-hmm. And so it don't sound like that Belshazzar is following in his father's footsteps. He's following where his father started, being his own God and and making his own decrees and stuff. Now, somebody read, Tommy, you want to start? Let's read verse 5. 5.
Okay. In the same hour came forth the fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote.
What would you think if you was drinking wine and all this kind of stuff, and all of a sudden a hand starts writing a figure on the wall? What would you think?
I start spitting my eyes and thinking, how much have I drank?
Well, let's turn back to Exodus 31 here, right fast. Exodus is the second book in the Old Testament.
31.
31.
Drank too much of my well.
If I ever get past Numbers here, I'll find Exodus right before Numbers, but Numbers is in Leviticus.
Exodus what?
31:18.
31:18. There it is, right there. All right. 31:18. Javier, you got it?
18.
Uh-huh.
When the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets with the testimony, the tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God.
So his finger of God was busy with what did he write on those tables of stone? He wrote the 10 Commandments with his finger. Now, turn over to Luke.
I can just picture him up there, just like.
Well, most of us seen the 10 Commandments, and they lightning strikes and it writes and like that. But
Watch the last night.
but I don't know. It doesn't say anything about big bolts of lightning coming. There were lightnings and thunders before, but it doesn't say that about he just said he wrote it with his finger, and there's no lightning mentioned in Daniel. Let's look over and see what else about this finger of God. Luke chapter 11, verse 20. Daniel, you got that one?
So, but if I cast out demons with the finger of God, surely the kingdom of God has come upon you.
So Christ mentioned the finger of God. So this, if you were to see something that start writing, go to appearing up there, and a man's hand just pointing at it, and its writing's appearing, what do you think what do you think would go on in your mind? Would you run? Would you be scared? Would you recognize it as God's hand? What would you do? What would you do if you were to see this writing happening anywhere, and there's just a form of a man's hand and writing appearing on the wall?
I'll do what he did, turn pale and me start talking.
Well, I was going to know what y'all thought you'd do, but he got a little scared, didn't he? All right, Autumn, read that verse. What is this? Where are we? 6?
And his face turned pale with fright, his knees knocked together in fear, and his legs gave way beneath him.
What does that say in the King James, Tom?
It says, then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against the other.
He got a little scared, didn't he?
Yeah.
The cartoons have a way of depicting things like this, and I've seen a cartoon where this it's shaking everywhere, and like that. we laugh about that kind of stuff, but this is the king of a pretty good sized nation. Nebuchadnezzar had built the kingdom into a gigantic kingdom, all the earth, all the known nations of the earth. And so this guy inherited the kingdoms of all the earth. And here he is, he's scared. And he's also, it says in there a little more than just that he's frightened. It says that his thoughts troubled him. So all of a sudden he said his thoughts troubled him. He's scared, and he said, "Oh my goodness, what have I done?" He's realizing he's done something and it's bugging him. And so it bugged him so much then that his joints began to loosen up and his knees got to knocking together. So this was he was terrified. This puzzled him and troubled him so much. When he saw that up there, he said, "Oh my goodness, I've done something wrong." He was frightened, and then he realized he was guilty because he said, "Oh, I've done something." And then he is so scared that he's just in the form of terror. And this is going from an excitingly happy, great party to all of a sudden panic, and terror. Now let's look at verse 7. Who's got that one?
I got it.
All right, let's do it.
The king cried aloud to bring the astrologers, the astrologers and the Chaldeans and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said unto the wise men of Babylon, Whosoever shall read this writing and shew me the meaning, the interpretation thereof, shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom.
So did he pray?
Nope.
What did he do?
Yeah, he called for his astrologers and enchanters even.
Started looking for help from humans. He started looking for help from his acquaintances and whomever was around there that's supposed to be able to do this stuff. The magicians and stuff. Do you ever wonder how they pull that rabbit out of the hat? I never have known how they do that. It looked like there's no rabbit in that hat, but they find him in there almost every time. So they were pretty. They knew how to do a lot of things and find a lot of things. The soothsayers, we mentioned them before. What were they? Soothsayers.
Is it fortune tellers?
Fortune tellers. And so what kind of a promise is this? Whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpreter thereof shall be clothed with what? Scarlet, have a chain of gold. What kind of promises are these? What is this?
Earthly promises?
Earthly promises. Yeah, these are earthly promises. You're going to even if you can tell him this dream, you're going to be the third ruler. Be this King Belshazzar, and then one other person, and then you. That's pretty high up on the ladder, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the king's looking. He's giving somebody a real good reason to tell him what this dream is, and so then, Joey, you got 8.
Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king.
Yeah. If you knew that you had been offered to be the third ruler in the kingdom and have all this position and everything, would you try to interpret that dream?
You bet.
I'd have been trying. What in the world does that mean? But what happens if you happen to interpret it, claim to know the interpretation, and you didn't know the interpretation? What would happen to you? Yeah, you get killed then, wouldn't you? So you're going to want to interpret it right, or if you did, you'd get all this earthly treasures and earthly opportunities. But if you did it wrong, you'd get killed. Now, so you're not going to say I don't know. You're just going to say they just couldn't do it. Now, over here you got verse 9.
So King Belshazzar Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew even more pale. His nobles were baffled.
Okay, so he couldn't find the answer, so what happened? He couldn't, none of the wise men or nobody, what happened to him? What did he do?
He got even more.
He's even more scared. How do you get more scared than your knees knocking together? You know, hey, this guy is terrified at this point, isn't he? Now, now, if you was like that, would you think there was any hope? All of a sudden, everybody that's supposed to know how to do this stuff can't do it? Would you think, my goodness, I've got no hope now? Yeah, you kind of thinking, well, who can tell me this? You know, I can't tell it. So what does, let's look at verse 10. Right. Buddy, you got verse 10?
So the queen entered the banquet hall. Because of the words of the king and the nobles, the queen spoke and said, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale.
All right. So what this queen? I don't really know who this queen is. I don't know
Where
whether
did she
that's.
come from?
I don't know whether that's Nebuchadnezzar's wife or or whether it's Belshazzar's wife. But but this queen, she comes in there, and what does she do for Belshazzar?
Try to comfort.
She tries to comfort him and encourage him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So says, "O king, live forever." She don't want to get killed either.
Right.
Let not thy thoughts trouble thee. She's saying, be calm, just settle down, you're going to be all right. Nor let thy countenance be changed. She's trying to get him encouraged so that he'd get his color back. Instead of pale white from fright, he was getting his color back. All right, Autumn, you got 11.
There is a man in your kingdom who has within him the spirit of the holy gods. During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, the man was found to have insight, understanding, and wisdom like that of the gods. Your predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar, made him chief over all the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers of Babylon.
All right, so
How could you have the job of chief over magicians and all this stuff and be a man of God and stuff like that?
well, he was made that by Nebuchadnezzar, and you notice that he didn't come in with all these that come in up there at the front.
Yeah.
And I would expect sometime after when Nebuchadnezzar, the last dream that he interpreted there in chapter 4 for Nebuchadnezzar, when Nebuchadnezzar was put out to pasture and eating like cattle, that was the last time we heard of Daniel until now. See, he hadn't been heard from, in this same 32 years. And now then the queen, and it doesn't specify which queen this is. So the queen could have been one of Nebuchadnezzar's wife, or it could have been this new king Belshazzar's wife. But anyway, she remembered Daniel, and so Daniel now he's getting on up there in years. All the time Nebuchadnezzar was king. He was about 18 years old or so when he come in when they captured him. And then, so he's 32 years since, so it's probably, he's getting up there in this, in this close to 50s to, probably, or like that. That's pretty old probably for this day and time. Now, but this queen remembered him. And says, verse 12. Joey, you want to do it?
This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation.
When this lady, queen, she remembered Daniel, she remembered quite a lot about him, didn't she? He is a man with excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting of dreams. She hadn't forgot him. And showing of hard sentences, dissolving of doubts, and all this was found, these characteristics found in one person, Daniel. Now, verse 13, Daniel.
Verse 13, verse chapter 4.
Yeah.
Okay. Verse 13. Okay. And Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah, whom my father, the king, brought from Judah?"
All right. So he brought him up there, and he's making Daniel say who he is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Verse 14, buddy.
Now I have heard about you that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you.
All right, so he remembers him. I've heard of thee. Yeah. Didn't pay much attention to him, but he'd heard of this man Daniel. Tom?
15.
Uh-huh.
And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, and they should read this writing, and make known unto me the interpretation whereof. But they could not shew the interpretation of the thing.
All right, Javier, 16.
Now I've heard that you are able to give interpretations to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a chain placed around your neck. You will be made first highest ruler in the kingdom.
So he's going to get rewarded here if he can interpret this dream. So we have the king now that Daniel's been brought up to his remembrance. He remembers him and has him brought in there. And probably if God hadn't intervened with this handwriting on the wall, Daniel probably never would have been heard of again, right? but the Lord showed Nebuchadnezzar who he was. Showed Nebuchadnezzar that he was the King of Kings and that he was the Lord of all the world and the earth. And now he's written this up there for this Belshazzar king. Yeah. Let's look at what Daniel says. Autumn, you want to read 17?
Daniel answered the king, "Keep your gifts and give them to someone else, but I will tell you what the writings mean."
So Daniel, does God want us to take all these earthly treasures?
No.
He didn't. Daniel knew that, and he didn't have any reason to have all that. Do you really need all these earthly treasures?
No.
Can't take them with you.
Yeah, I got me $1 million house, and I got me a horse car, and I got me all this stuff. Do you really need all that?
I didn't know you had all
Oh yeah, I don't know.
He's got a stash.
Yeah, I got all that. Actually, I live in a little 1,200 square foot house that I have to work on all the time to keep going. These earthly treasures and rewards, that's not of God, and not something that, if you're going to serve God, you may be in a leadership position, but it's not to get the things. It's still to minister for God and still to do God's will. And if God puts you in that position, you still need to be doing God's will. Now, where did we stop? 18? Joey?
We're on 18, right?
Yeah.
O King, the Most High God, granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar, your father.
O thou King. So God gave Nebuchadnezzar what? His father, Belshazzar's father. What did he give him?
Kingdom.
The kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. All this come from God, even though that he's not Nebuchadnezzar was king of Babylon. But God gave him all of this stuff. And when did he give it to him? After he confessed God as the sovereign God.
Right.
Before then, he was king of all this stuff, but he didn't have the honor, and he wasn't exalted, now, verse 19 out here.
Because of the high position he gave him, all the peoples in the nation and the men of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled.
Who's doing this speaking here in these verses?
Daniel.
Daniel's doing the speaking, right? And he's reminding everybody of what the power that Nebuchadnezzar had. Now, verse 20, Daniel.
Verse 20. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him.
That's but when his heart was lifted up, what does that mean? Somebody, what's the first phrase in that verse in yours, Alden?
It says, but when his heart and mind were puffed up with arrogance.
Puffed up with arrogance. So what's he doing here?
Being prideful.
He's building himself up. Nebuchadnezzar was building himself up in this verse. You got to think he's talking about Nebuchadnezzar here. Daniel is, and so he's describing Nebuchadnezzar to Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's son. Now, he was all prideful, and he's all about I. That's what King Nebuchadnezzar was. All right, Tom, you got 21?
Yeah. And he was driven up from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beast, and his dwelling was with wild asses. And they fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that appointed over whomsoever he will.
Yeah, he stayed in that state, Nebuchadnezzar did, until he acknowledged the sovereignty of God. And we stay in the same state of if you're unsaved, you're in that same state. You may not be out there grazing grass like an oxen or like that, but you're just as lost as Nebuchadnezzar. And you won't never find peace in your life until you acknowledge God as the sovereign God, the God of your life, and the God of all the universe. Buddy, you got 22?
Yeah, his son,
Belshazzar, I guess.
Now, was that? Have not humble your heart, even through you knew all of this.
So this Belshazzar, he knew what his grandfather had gone through, right? But what did Belshazzar not do? He didn't learn anything from his predecessor, did he? He did just like him. He didn't humble his heart. So he knew what his grandfather or father had gone through, but he still hardened his heart. But has lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, and brass, iron, wood, and stone, which you see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways hast thou not glorified. So is Daniel saying that he's praised all these gods, but are these the gods that what control is the god of silver going to have over Belshazzar?
Right.
He doesn't have any, does he? There's not even a god of silver, but that's who they was praying for. And god of gold and brass and iron and wood and stone. Can you see those gods?
Nope.
They can't see them because they don't exist. All right, come on. Somebody forgot their medicine. All right. Now, who should he be? Who should he been looking to?
The God of heaven and earth.
Why?
Because he rules our very breath.
He rules our life. He knows when we're alive or dead. He decides whether we're to live or not to live. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, that's your life. And so if you're praising all these gods you can't see, you don't know, you can't feel, you've got, and you're neglecting God, you're going to wind up in the same type of situation. You're going to be away from God, so you're going to have to first acknowledge that God is God and ask Him for forgiveness and confess Him as your Lord, the sovereign God of your life. But Belshazzar hadn't done that. All right, verse 24.
Anybody?
Yeah.
So God has sent His hand to write this message. You want me going?
Well, all right, yeah, go ahead.
This is a message that was written. Many?
Say that word again.
Many?
Many.
Hold it, she's speaking in tongues.
Tekel or Tekel and parson. This is what the words mean. Many means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end.
All right.
Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed on the balances and have not measured up. Parson means divided. Your kingdom has divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
All right. Now let's stop right there for a minute. I've got a Bible verse to look up here. Revelations for verse 27. Revelation 6:5.
Revelation 6:5.
Yeah. That's somewhere close to the end of the Bible. Revelation is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's right at the in my book.
We're going to look at these others, but we're going to look at this Revelation 6:5 and see what it says. Okay, Javier, you got that one? 6:5 Revelation.
When the Lamb opened the third seal, no wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
When
it.
the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales.
Pair of balances or scales. So these balances, people have been all the way. That's in the future, in verse 11. But here God is still holding Belshazzar in the balances. He's still back here, 500 BC plus or minus whatever years that was. He is still holding people in the balances. So if he is holding people in balances that time and holding us in the balances at the end, are we still in the balances?
Yes.
We're still being weighed
Amen.
by God
Amen.
daily, right? Every day. And it's important to know, one, you got to put God first above everything, and then you need to know that you're being, the things and activities and what we say and do, we're all being held accountable for. And we're fixing to see here how accountable Belshazzar was held. But let's look at these names. It says first, I don't know that we can say them proper. I'm going to say this is the interpretation of the thing, Mene, M-E-N-E. What's that? What did that mean?
The number of days of your reign was they brought to an end.
So what his kingdom was soon to be finished, right? Then this T-E-K-E-L, that's the balances. So it's like a pair of scales. And Belshazzar was found what?
Wanted.
In King James it says wanted.
What's it say in yours?
Wanted.
Wanted.
You've been found
What
wanted.
does yours say?
What verse y'all looking at?
27, Tickle.
What the meaning
Take
of the
it.
words mean.
It means weighed. You have been weighed and balanced and have not measured up.
Yeah. Balances are scales, and you do what? And you're being weighed. He's weighed his actions and his behavior. He's weighed Belshazzar's commitment to him or not committed to him. He's now Perez, P-E-R-E-S. Thy kingdom is what? Divided and given to Medes and the Persians. Now this is a prophecy that Daniel read to Nebuchadnezzar, that his kingdom, the kings following him, was going to be not near as great as Nebuchadnezzar was, and that Nebuchadnezzar's countries, his kingdom was going to collapse and be destroyed eventually. And this is pretty soon after King Nebuchadnezzar passed away that Belshazzar is having this party, and then at the end of this party, now, so he's going to divide the kingdom, and he hadn't measured up to God's standards, and God is going to tell him what he's going to do. Now, read verse 29 there, Joey.
Then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the third ruler in the kingdom.
So he went ahead and promoted Daniel. Anyway, that's the same thing that Nebuchadnezzar did too. As Daniel refused it, but after he did it, he went ahead and clothed Daniel. Now, what that's telling us, I believe, is that when we are working in our lives under the guidance of God, and we refuse to do bad things, things that God doesn't want us to do, even for a gift. When somebody wants to give us a gift, and we don't take that gift for the wrong reasons, our selfish gain, we do what God wants us to do, then God still rewards us then back on the other. It may not be that same thing that we were offered, but he rewards us back because we continued to stay with him and did his will. Now, verse 30 and 31. All right. Javier, you got those two?
Sure. That very night, Belshazzar, king of Babylon, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62.
All right. So, what happened to Belshazzar?
He was slain.
It didn't last. His kingdom didn't last very long at all, did he? He just got to have one big party.
In that last verse, how old did he say he was?
62.
That was Darius, though.
Yeah, okay.
Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 80 years old. So how many years is that?
62.
62. A score is 20 years in 2 years. So this king, Darius, he's a little older. What do you think? It doesn't say in there who killed Belshazzar, but it says that he was killed. And so his kingdom lasted a very short period of time. Now his kingdom is being divided. And as long as we are true to God, God will bless us in the way that He wants to. And we'll be happy and content in that. But it starts with confessing God as Savior or as your sovereign Lord, and then following His teachings.